it's a witch hunt. It's just a continuation of a witch hunt. They want to silence you. They want to silence you, and they mean silence.
Despite what the former president and his allies have said for now more than 2.5 years, and continue to insist to this very hour, the Georgia election was not stolen.
This summit comes at a moment when our region and the world are being tested by geopolitical competition, by a climate crisis, by Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine, by nuclear provocations.
Hello, I'm Robert Costa in Washington. Welcome to America Decides. Former President Trump now facing an increasingly complicated legal and political schedule. Trump and his 18 co-defendants have now until Friday next week to surrender to authorities in Georgia in that 2020 election case. That's 2 days after the first Republican primary debate. And Fulton County District Attorney Fani Willis, she wants to go on trial starting March 4th, 2024. That's 1 day before the big contests of Super Tuesday and a week before Georgia's Republican primary. For more on all of this, CBS News congressional correspondent Scott McFarland and Nicole Killian join us now. Nicole is in Atlanta covering Fulton County day by day. Nicole, let's begin with you. What's the latest in Georgia?
Well, as you can see, Bob, we are now outside of the Fulton County Jail, outside of the entrance where they normally process people for intake. And this is where we expect the former president and all of these 18 co-defendants to eventually surrender and turn themselves in for processing. The sheriff has made clear that he is going to treat all of these individuals just like anyone else, mugshots and all. We have yet to see any of these defendants surrender, but worth noting that just a short time ago, it appears that Jeffrey Clark has now contested this proposed trial date by District Attorney Fani Willis, this March 4th trial date that she has proposed 1 day before Super Tuesday. And in this court filing, his attorneys argue that the District Attorney's office did not confer with opposing counsel and that they have no earthly idea what their schedules may be. So he and his attorneys are arguing that this date is premature.
Nicole, I've been talking to some sources at the IRS. It seems like you've been in Georgia so much, you might start having to use that as your zip code down there. And Scott, I mean, you spent so much time outside the federal courthouse in Washington. I hope that's not becoming your new address. But how is the federal case in Washington playing out right near the Capitol where the insurrection took place? How is that going to affect, if at all, what's going on in Georgia?
Could be really impactful. I'm fixated on this one date on the calendar, August 28th. It's a week from Monday. That same day, 10 a.m. Eastern Time, is a pivotal hearing in this federal case Jack Smith has brought in the 2020 election. The D.C. federal judge is likely to set the trial date that day. She's also likely to speak or could speak about all the things Donald Trump has been posting about her, about Jack Smith, about the case, about the District of Columbia. All that could come up 10 a.m. Eastern Time on Monday. That same day, that same time in Georgia, in federal court, Mark Meadows has a hearing to move his case from Fulton County to federal court. It's likely a pivotal hearing because it could indicate, it could foreshadow what Trump's going to argue when he likely argues to move his case from local court to federal court in Georgia. All that happens at the same time that Monday morning, and everything is in such close proximity. That's just after the surrender deadline for Trump and the others in Fulton County. It's also the same time as a potential hearing in the Florida federal case. So put aside all these legal challenges, including the one Jeffrey Clark has just made that Nicole just referenced. The court hearings are going to start to clash with each other, which adds another complication.
Let's dig into this a little bit. Nicole, can you jump in on that? If some of these defendants, including Trump himself, start to argue that this shouldn't play out in Georgia, that it should be a federal case, what's the response from the Fulton County District Attorney and your sources close to this case? Is there a real possibility that the entire Georgia case could be pushed off to the federal side or not?
Well, keep in mind, and in talking to legal experts, what they say is that, you know, in terms of trying to get this moved to federal court, that really is only going to apply to a fraction of these defendants. I mean, in the case of Mark Meadows, A lot of the details that were cited in this indictment stem from his time when he served as the former president's chief of staff at the White House. So potentially he has a case and argument to make, as does the former president. But for Rudy Giuliani, he was not working at the White House at the time, so maybe not. So I think it may be hard or a difficult scenario to see all of these defendants try to push this to federal court if they were not former White House or administration officials. Jeffrey Clark, another example, who might be able to make that argument. But even still, I don't know that that is going to dissuade the district attorney in any way. I think she is determined to try this case. And, you know, she has been involved in complicated cases before. So I expect that the district attorney would try to contest this in some shape or form if we see others follow Mark Meadows' lead.
Speaking of the district attorney, let's listen to what former President Trump had to say today to Larry Kudlow about her and other prosecutors.
It's a witch hunt. It's just a continuation of a witch hunt. They want to silence you. They want to silence you. And they mean silence. They are I think they're sick people. I think they are people that have no idea how the world works, and they have no idea the anger they cause.
So that's what the former president said, Scott, but you have new reporting about what the former president's allies want to do to counter these prosecutions.
Even at this early stage, there are political points to be won and lost, and CBS News has reviewed all the recently posted legislation during this August recess. 3 different proposals to defund Jack Smith from U.S. House Republicans, to strip the funding for his prosecution, and in one case, Bob, to strip his paycheck. This is nothing that's going to pass the Senate or certainly be signed by the president, but it's impactful for a few different reasons. House Republicans are rallying behind these bills. It's a political message. Some of them may want Trump's endorsement in primaries next year, so this may look good to them politically. But also, one of the proposals from Marjorie Taylor Greene, there in the middle, might add that language to appropriations bills. And we are in a very fragile state right now in getting spending bills passed and a federal government shutdown averted. If that language gets added to an appropriations bill, it could make it easier or more likely that the government shuts down and complicate any chances of keeping that train on the tracks and keeping the government open.
Nicole, you're down there in Georgia tracking not only the cases, but the politics of all of this. Georgia's a swing state after what happened in 2020. 2 Democratic senators. Republicans are trying to come back in that state. How is the political side of Georgia playing out, on unfolding, especially because the incumbent governor, Brian Kemp, isn't exactly a Trump ally?
Yeah, well, I think it's interesting to piggyback off of Scott in the sense that, to a certain extent, we're seeing some Republican lawmakers here in the state take a page out of House Republicans' playbook, in the sense that you also have state lawmakers who are now calling for Fani Willis's office to be defunded. And just today, there was a state senator who is now calling for a special emergency session for the state legislature to reconvene to investigate the district attorney as a result of this indictment. And now the district attorney's office is not commenting on that. The governor's office hasn't either. But one of the governor's political aides did weigh in prior to this request by the state senator, apparently kind of knocking down this idea, suggesting, you know, why would we kick an election mule down for a second time? I'm kind of paraphrasing his language there. It was a little more colorful than that. But, you know, I think if you were to ask the governor, it sounds like he probably doesn't want to go there. But certainly this is something where other lawmakers could start to raise calls as well. You know, obviously to hold a special session here in the state, either the governor would have to convene that, or you would have to have 3/5 of the state legislature in agreement pushing for this. So it doesn't appear that this state senator has that kind of support. So that's something certainly to watch going forward.
Nicole, very quickly, any word on when former President Trump plans to show up in Georgia to surrender to authorities?
Well, from what we're hearing, it sounds like that he will do this at some point in time next week. But keep in mind, you know, once again, this could kind of bump up against the calendar. As you very well know, the first Republican presidential primary debate is scheduled for next Wednesday in Milwaukee. We understand, at least as of now, the former president is unlikely to attend. But that being said, this whole speculation and, reporting around when he may turn himself in, and just his case in general, of course, continues to generate a lot of attention. So it could potentially steal some of the attention away from that debate if he doesn't show up, if he turns himself in, let's say midweek. I mean, who knows? But that being said, we will have to wait and see. I think our understanding is the negotiations are still underway for his surrender.
Nicole Killian, Scott McFarland, thank you so much for your reporting. And in 6 days, the Republican field will face off on the debate stage for the first time. But will the former president be there? We'll discuss next. You're streaming America Decides.
Honestly, Megyn, if you don't like it, I'm sorry. I've been very nice to you, although I could probably maybe not be based on the way you have treated me. I never attacked him on his look, and believe me, there's plenty of subject matter. He wants to be a tough guy. Well, let me talk. Quiet.
Wow, that was almost a decade ago. Welcome back to America Decides. That was Donald Trump back in 2015 and 2016. The now former president holds a commanding lead this summer in the polls, but the question remains in the GOP race, will he attend next week's first GOP debate?
I tell people, I've debated Donald Trump 1,000 times, just never with the cameras on. But look, I know the former president, I know everybody on that stage, and I'm looking forward to having a vigorous debate.
I think everybody has a responsibility to show up and debate. I think that that's an important part of the process. And to say that somehow you're above it, I don't think that's what the voters want to hear.
Ashley Etienne and Maura Gillespie join us now. Ashley is a CBS News contributor and the former communications director for Vice President Kamala Harris and former House Speaker Nancy Pelosi. Maura is the founder of Blue Stack Strategies. She previously served as an advisor to former House Speaker John Boehner and former Congressman Adam Kinzinger. Great to have both of you here for America Decides. Maura, let's begin with you. Former President Trump, your sources in the GOP, your colleagues in that party, what do they think about what he's going to do next week?
He'll likely host his own thing, whether he calls into different shows and complains about the debate or hosts his own on Truth Social or whatever platform he chooses, with maybe Tucker Carlson has been rumored. But I think he'll do his own thing. Obviously, it could be a last-minute decision, but he has made it pretty clear he doesn't see a reason to debate or sign the pledge. So, but I will say, watching that back, I'm really looking forward to him not being on the debate stage, because I'd love to hear about the issues and what each candidate is going to bring to the table as far as how they plan to address the issues facing everyday Americans.
Ashley, if former President Trump doesn't show up, does that take the oxygen out of the debate? Do Democrats see that as kind of a non-event, or will they be paying close attention?
There are a couple of things that I'm actually looking for in this debate, and I think Democrats are looking for as well. One, which is who's going to be the pace setter? Who's going to go out fast and hard to attack Donald Trump, especially if he's not on the stage? And how is that going to set an environment that will enable the other candidates to lean in on him? We know from polling, including CBS's polling, as Mara pointed out as well, that the large majority of Republican primary voters, more than 50%, are persuadable. So Donald Trump can actually lose. So that's what I'm going to be watching. Who's going to go out fast and hard? Here's the other thing I'm going to be watching: whether or not the rest of the candidates attack and attack DeSantis, whether or not they pile on to DeSantis, being he's the strongest number two. And then the third is the person who I'm calling the sleeper, and that's Tim Scott. I think Tim Scott is really surging in a way that people aren't paying much attention to. I think Iowa is a perfect environment for him. He's leaning on his faith. He's got this optimistic vision and message that's resonating with people. So I think it's going to be quite interesting, and I think it's going to be interesting to see how he handles Scott handles Trump and handles DeSantis, especially in Trump's absence. So that's what I'm watching. I don't think oxygen will be out of the room. Really, it's going to position these Republicans to really show the American people how they're going to take on Donald Trump in the next couple races.
Maura, what do you think of Senator Scott? Does he have a real shot in Iowa or not?
I think he does. He is personable. People really enjoy him, people who have worked with him on Capitol Hill, but also you're seeing it in Iowa as he engages with people who are there at the state fair with children. I mean, he is just a likable guy. And he really does bring a lot to the table, not only his legislative acumen, but again, personality-wise, and a personable, a relatable, relatable story, a really interesting story. And he's just somebody who I think really could make a lot of headway, as Ashley mentioned too, here in this debate. So yes, I think he could really surge, continue the surge.
What about former New Jersey Governor Chris Christie? Maura, you are in New Jersey right now. You know the state well. Is this someone who could really have a moment on the debate stage? He's raising the stakes for himself.
Absolutely. He's been calling out the fact that there aren't more people going directly after Donald Trump and the need to do so. As a party, if we want to win, we have to move beyond Donald Trump. And you're seeing that with polling that's come out. He cannot win in a general election. And this primary, this debate coming up, Christie's going to hone on that. I think he'll really, hit Donald Trump hard, and then also call out the other candidates on the stage who haven't done so. And so, yes, I'm looking forward to seeing how Christie performs next week. Again, as a fellow New Jerseyan, he will not be shy about how he feels, and I appreciate that.
Ashley, what do you make of Vice President Harris being a target in so much of the rhetoric from some of these candidates? They're not going after President Biden, but former Ambassador Nikki Haley keeps bringing up Vice President Harris. Governor DeSantis has done the same. You know her world well. What do you make of that kind of talk from Republicans trying to bring her into the spotlight at this moment?
Yeah, I mean, I will quote one of my former bosses, Nancy Pelosi. She used to always say, the reason why they're coming after me is because I'm effective. And I think that's also what you're seeing with Vice President. Here's a couple of things I don't think she's been getting credit for. One is she's taken some really big risk. She went down to Florida and confronted the Republican Party on the issue of race, not just DeSantis, but on the issue of race. And that smoked out Tim Scott. And then Tim Scott came out and criticized the field and DeSantis about this issue. So it enabled him to come out and criticize and really hold the governor accountable for his actions and really raise this issue on a bigger stage. So she's been really taking some really calculated risks, going down to Tennessee, going to Iowa to talk about abortion. And that's when you're the vice president, that's what you have to do. You have to take risks because President Biden needs her not to have a moment, but he needs her to catch fire. And I think she's actually doing that. So I'm not surprised that they're coming after her, because she's actually finding her footing and is being incredibly effective in creating value for President Biden.
And Maura, any quick thoughts on that? Why Republicans keep bringing up Vice President Harris?
It's a winning message for Republicans, especially when you're trying to, appeal to the base. She just she's not likable to the Republican Party, and they're never going to get behind her. So if they feel like the threat is that she will become president because of Joe Biden's age, that's a clever tactic for the Republican Party to use, because they can rally behind that. If they aren't already rallied behind, they don't want Joe Biden to be president, they'll definitely rally around the fact they don't want Vice President Harris to become president. And
real quick from both of you, Ashley first, then Maura, who do you predict will be one name we'll be talking about next Thursday, a week from today, after the Republican debate? Ashley?
I think you're going to be talking about DeSantis. I don't think he can pull it out. I think we've seen the best that he's got. So I think he's going to continue to, prove this point that the reset is not resetting. So that's who I think we're going to be talking about. And then also, I'm putting money on Tim Scott. I think he's going to surprise us. The advantage that Tim Scott has is he's running from behind. And when you're a candidate at this position, who can attest to that? George W. Bush, Barack Obama, Donald Trump, they were all running behind at this point. So I think he's got the advantage. So those are the two people who I think we'll be talking about.
Maura, close it up for us.
I think Ramaswamy is going to make DeSantis look pretty silly, and that'll frustrate DeSantis. And then I believe Chris Christie will be somebody who will have plenty of zingers that we will remember and talk about on Thursday.
Excellent. Great to have you both here, as always, for your top-rate analysis. Ashley Etienne and Maura Gillespie, two veteran strategists, thank you so much. Now, President Biden is set to host a first-of-its-kind summit with the leaders of Japan and South Korea. That's tomorrow. What they're hoping to accomplish, we'll get into that next. You're streaming America Decides. Welcome back to America Decides. President Biden is at Camp David, that famous spot, tonight ahead of a high-profile meeting. He is hosting Japanese Prime Minister Kishida and South Korean President Yoon. Administration officials say they're set to discuss closer military cooperation, the mutual threats all three nations face and future opportunities to coordinate more closely across many fronts. And this will be the first time the president has hosted foreign leaders at Camp David. CBS News correspondent Christina Ruffini joins us now from the White House. Christina, always great to chat with you. What is this summit? Thank you, Christina. Great to have you here. So what is this summit going to be about? Is it all about China more than anything, or are some other things on the agenda too?
Well, officials have been asked that question directly, including Secretary of State Antony Blinken, and he swerved a little bit and said, look, these are allies that have a lot of things to talk about. Obviously, regional security is going to be top of the list, but there are other issues like the environment, like close cooperation, like military drills that they want to discuss. But this is coming at a really critical time when these three allies are seeing not only a rising China, but increasingly concerning alliance, for them anyway, between Russia and China. So they want to make sure they're in a position to defend their territory and the region if and when it comes to that. And look, Russia's intervention in Ukraine has made these countries nervous watching China, which could potentially have geographic aspirations in the Asia-Pacific region. But there's a bit of a catch here, whereas in all these, Japan and Korea are very close allies with the United States, but Japan and Korea have a complicated historical relationship. So this is the first time President Biden has brought leaders together at Camp David, and these two countries actually met bilaterally for the first time since 2012 in March. So there's an effort by the U.S. to try to consolidate these two countries who have the same goals in a lot of places but have this contentious history to all get on the same page with security cooperation and with communication so that they can help fulfill that agenda together.
Could China be a way to do that? China has been increasing cooperation with Russia, with North Korea to some extent. So how has that effort by the Chinese been important in prompting more of a conversation among all of these nations?
I think it's been forcing the issue more than we've seen previously. Look, I mean, this meeting in March between the two leaders was really groundbreaking. The thing they're dealing with is all politics are local, and that's true even in Japan and Korea. Both these leaders are up for re-election, and they have domestic populations that have long-held antagonistic feelings towards the politics of Japan or towards the politics in South Korea. And this goes back to World War II, when Japan occupied part of Korea, and then the Koreans get upset about that history, and the Japanese get very upset about the rhetoric coming out of Korea. So this is a long-standing issue that the U.S. has tried to resolve and kind of, no one wants to brush these issues under the carpet. They're important, and they're important to the domestic populations. But the effort here and watching the geopolitical landscape, the hope is that these politicians are able to see the larger objective and the larger commonalities they have in common, more than just the enemy of my enemy is my friend. But we all have to work together to get these objectives, because they're looking at China, they're looking at Russia and realizing they're going to need help, and they might need each other no matter how complicated that past history has been.
Excellent reporting. We really appreciate you taking the time. From the White House, Christina Ruffini, CBS News correspondent. That ends our show today. You can stream America Decides Monday to Thursday at 5 p.m. Eastern. You're streaming CBS News.